Well, hi everyone. I'm Leslie Johnson and I'm co-senior programmer here at the Planet in Focus Film Festival. And we're here with two of the filmmakers behind the beautiful film WORKHORSE. WORKHORSE is an ode, an essay to horse-powered labor through contemporary experiences of three teamsters whose work and lives are intertwined with their stoic equine partners. So today I would like to welcome director Cliff Caines and cinematographer Randall. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to have you here today. So I'd just like to jump in and just begin with just a question on what inspired or sparked the idea behind WORKHORSE and why a film about horse-powered labor. And also, within that question, I understand that it's part of a trilogy, and I was just wondering what the idea was also behind the trilogy and where WORKHORSE fits within that body of work.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you for having us, and thank you to the Planet in Focus Film Festival for programming us online. This is wonderful. We can really reach a large audience here, which we've been waiting for. So, and to share our project, we've been working on it since 2016. But in fact, the idea for me happened around 2015. I was in the sort of rural Southern Ontario in sort of farm cottage country, and had been exploring an area that I go to a lot up in the Minden Hills area. And we came across a fall fair, an agricultural fair, which I'm from Northern Ontario, where agriculture and fall fairs aren't as prevalent. But to me, it really spoke to me coming from a mining community, which, and speaking of a series of films, our first feature-length film in this series was A Rock and a Hard Place, which looked at my hometown of Red Lake, Ontario, and the potential of an open pit mine. And it really launched into this idea of looking at labor and rural communities and that relationship between them. And so when I came across this agricultural fair in 2015, I experienced what was called a horse pull, which I'd never experienced before, which all I can describe it as is a tractor pull with horses. And seeing my first horse pull, really for me, it was an explosive moment of the entire history of horses and labor at once. And I sort of time traveled when I saw that moment in the present, and I thought, wow, this is both interesting in the horse's role in cinema, and then the horse's role in labor and in Ontario and then in Canada. So it really, I really felt like I had to know more, and I wanted to know more. So for me, it was a learning experience, but also something I could relate to. So we started following a family of horse pullers who had been competing. It was a generational thing. The grandfather had been horse pulling in the 70s. Mike Wessel was one of the horse pullers that we were following. He was a competitor. It's a sport, which also interested me. And then his son was taking it on, which was very curious to me, which then precipitated, this step into the draft horse, specifically the workhorse community, the subculture in Ontario and Southern Ontario. And so I wanted to know the history more, and I found one of the last horse loggers in Ontario, and we found him just at the nick of the time. He was just retiring after 40 years in the industry. And then I was thinking about the history and how it evolved from how were horses used, in settlement and agriculture in specifically Canada and North America, and thinking about how they really are almost long disappeared now, but there's still communities and subcultures that are maintaining this history in the present. And it was hard, actually. It was difficult to find farmers that are still working with horses, specifically outside of religious obligation. So of course, Mennonites and Amish communities still work with horses today for religious reasons, but to find individuals for other reasons, and that was the question: is why use horses now?
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is, so let's talk a little bit more about the characters and what it was that you were kind of like looking for in their story, and what you think maybe is the common thread or ethos about the lifestyle that they lead that kind of binds them together.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Leslie. For me, it was a matter of finding and spending time with the characters. In fact, if you look at the chronology of the narrative, we start with the horse logger, and then we go. It's in chapters. It's designed in sort of three acts and three chapters and three sort of character groups. And context of work with horses, from logging to farming to then this sort of new sport of horse pulling, which is a way for agricultural communities to pay homage and to celebrate their communities and that history, even though the horses are no longer, hold that central role in agriculture. So the characters, we really followed the horse pullers first for an entire season, a year for them. They go to some 30 horse pulls a year, on a good year. And they're very dedicated, and that for me was compelling. And there was also this sense of danger, and there was a sense of there is some controversy around, in terms of should we be using horses for this now? And we came to learn that the horse pullers have this reverence, respect for the horses and the care that they give them. And we wanted to really depict that in the film, this idea of the care, which is part of, like, the care and maintenance is also part of owning and working with horses. And that's something that I learned very quickly, and wanted to spend time with that. And that, for me, as a filmmaker, I was very interested in the labor. And then I was interested in this ideological choice to use horses now specifically, and allow the characters in the film. So Art Shannon is the horse puller that we follow, and we sort of discovered, we didn't know initially that he was at the edge of retirement, and it's a thread that we picked up on. And then this idea, as we were working with the horse pullers, this idea of literally passing the reins on to the next generation, to have 3 generations of horse pullers. And then for the farming, there was also this generational, this question, this thread of succession for me was really interesting. And outside of the labor, there's this knowledge that is embodied both in the horses and in the characters themselves, the real people that are working with these horses. It's astounding to me, the skill it takes, the muscle memory. And that's, in the film, we show a workshop, which is this idea of this passing on of knowledge. And this idea of husbandry within animals and within agriculture is, I think, a theme that we wanted to explore. But really, it's called WORKHORSE, but the film is also about, the relationship between humans and animals.
Sure. What did you guys learn throughout the process of making the film? What most impressed you about the lifestyle? And did you have any sort of hands-on encounters that informed the story as you were kind of going along throughout the process of making it? I'll pass that over to both of you guys.
I'll start with very early mornings. A lot of very early mornings. Especially when you have the cameras ready for those early mornings.
Why is that? Is that's just sort of part of that lifestyle? They just start right at
their days start when the horses start, and our days started an hour before that. So that was usually 4 a.m.
Yeah, it was agrarian hours for sure. I think that's something Ryan and I have talked about a lot in the cinematography and our approach. And we had a lot of conversations really about how do we, number one, express the scale of these enormous horses, these beasts of burden. And number one, it was the scale. How do we, both the scale of the land that we were working on, the scale of the individual with their horses, but then also for us, it's a slower paced film. And this is something that we really wanted to express, is how do we express this different way of working, especially in contrast, like when you see the Art Shannon, our horse logger, work in the forest. What's interesting, he's working in a forestry industry, and he speaks to this idea of sustainability. But what was really interesting to me is that after spending a day in the forest, in the woods, I realized that we didn't hear any machines, right? We heard horses, we heard the clanking, and that's something, in terms of our audio approach as well, we wanted to match the sensorial experience. And how do we express this idea of a slower pace, a tactile way of working. And that led us also to the black and white photography as well. We wanted not only to express this idea of gray tones that we found, but the tonality and the texture. I think the texture for us was the most important of the horse's hair, and the leather veins and the metal. And for us, it was a really tactile experience being there. And I think that's what we both learned. And Ryan, maybe you can speak to that more in terms of our approach.
There's something to do with there's a certain simplicity with it, but there's also wild complexity in the emotional interrelation of, you know, human to horse. So like, while it's slow and seemingly simple, the like personality and the balancing of those personalities of the horse and the handler was, I think, reflected using that black and white, and it kind of it really brought out the textures of what we were seeing, because they're really beautiful kind of vistas and horsehair and leather, and you know, there was a lot of visual texture that I think the black and white really expressed well on top of that versus how it looked in color. That said, we designed the look in black and white. We were shooting video, so we shot in color and then monitored in black and white. We had a LUT on it pretty much the whole time.
Yeah. So I wanted to maybe talk a little bit more about the cinematography, in the sense that, you know, there's so much meaning that can be expressed through imagery that is said kind of outside interview and voiceover. And you guys, I think, did such an elegant job of doing that. And so we discussed some of like the black and white choices behind that. What about some of the other bold kind of aesthetic choices that you chose? One coming to mind obviously is the really like beautiful sequences with the horses in slow motion. Maybe kind of talk a little bit about just the visual language you guys spoke to together and how you came up with some of those more poetic and kind of elegant sequences.
Well, I'll start with setting up like Cliff and I's relationship. We met in art school in '98 in lines to get our photo taken for our student cards. And we've been making films ever since. So the visual language is a long developed kind of back and forth over 18 years now. So I'll let Cliff handle the more elegant poetic speak of, you know, the reason why we did that. But that's kind of like a preface for how we get here.
Yeah, it's allowed that relationship that we have. We've been working as collaborators, and I think the idea of collaboration is an underlying theme in our work as well, and that's why we look at communities and smaller communities specifically. We both come from small communities, but how does this inform some of the decisions we made with WORKHORSE? It was really, for us, it was a way to respond to the environment and the subjects that we were documenting. There was this performative nature to the horse pulls. It is a spectator sport. And then in contrast, the horse logging and farming with horses is a very, if not pastoral, it's a very quiet and very personal experience. And it becomes, I was really thinking about the history of horses in cinema, and of course, thinking back to the first time that we see horses in cinema and thinking about Edward Muybridge's motion studies, and their role not only takes place in our agricultural history, but also our cinematic history, this idea. So the horse really is central there as a theme, and we wanted to develop and really, at all times, really look at this way of for us, it was always almost a scientific way of looking at it, which is also sort of for us related to the history of documentary, but specifically in relation to horses. You know, how were they photographed? What was that role? And then trying to translate this and express this idea of the almost bliss or the ecstatic feeling of working with horses, both on the micro level, like Ryan spoke to earlier, is that there was this unspoken relationship. So our horse logger, Art Shannon, he would barely have to say anything to the horses and they knew where they were to go. it's phenomenal to witness and be there. So, and to try to express that, it was a matter of how do we adapt that feeling, and for us, this idea of using quite poetic slow motion, and in some cases very explicitly framed photography, for us was a way to kind of feed back to, if not reflect, the performativity that was going on, but then also the quiet and serene, really, relationship. And that's part of the ideology of working with horses, really, for me, is what I learned, is that there's, of course, there's ideological, there's political, there's social, economic reasons, and ecological reasons to work with horses today. But there's a difference between working with a tractor and working with a horse. There's a difference between working with, a clear-cut skidder, for example, like a large machine versus a large horse. So I think for us, that was what the major motivation between some of the choices.
That also kind of gets echoed in the camera movement. Like, we start off very slow and controlled, responding to horse's movement, and as we progress to the performative horse pulling, things loosen up quite dramatically to kind of fit that arc as well.
It feels like you had a lot of time to be with your subjects and really plan out shots very well, kind of even like before they happened. You must have kind of spent quite a lot of time doing the planning and spending the time. I appreciated the feeling of it just sort of being so elegantly kind of like planned out that way.
There was a lot of testing, a lot of test shooting. Horses never hit their marks. So there was some real lucky landing points. Like, having a patient frame with, especially like to keep a solid patient frame up. Sometimes like when the horse like starts getting to the edge of the frame, and like as an operator, I'm like, please stop. And they do. And it's like, okay, great. But it takes like Cliff has really pushed that aesthetic, because like my gut instinct as an operator is to like pan over a little bit, but we held up, and like that pacing in that patient frame I thought was really effective. I think that I went on a bit of a tangent there.
Oh, that's great. No, absolutely. It's nice to know how you guys work that way, because, it does have such a beautiful quality to it. And there is obviously a lot that goes, behind the scenes into sort of how that comes into fruition. So it's nice to hear you guys talk about that.
That said, like, there were a couple shots where like, that's not going to be in the film.
Yeah, more than a couple shots. There was, it's 80 hours of patience, right? It's shooting for a long time, as long as we can with them, and really just being patient. And again, that's part of just reflecting the Teamsters that we were following. They have this extreme patience with the animals and this relationship that they've built, and in both training, themselves. They have 40, 30 years experience in sometimes. And I think for me, that was, one of the heartbreaking aspects of the film, is that they do have this knowledge, like I said, this embodied knowledge that, in some cases they cannot pass on. There's no one to take it on to. In some cases with the farmers, there's this question of, are we going to take on this knowledge and this responsibility? And in the horse pulling, we were fortunate to also work with Cody, the son of the horse puller we were following. And it's interesting because he ended up taking a much larger role in the film than we originally intended. And it's because we could really see there's this friction that the horse pull is a dying sport, as it's a long death of the horse here in its role in our society, in our culture, and in agriculture. And then to see a young individual like Cody, has so much joy and respect, and also learning too. Like, we really get to see that learning. I was absolutely afraid of horses before making this film. And I think something we learned is that, there's a way to work with horses. There's a way to, it's funny, the horses were they were more scared of us, the filmmakers, and they were tentative at first, but then, you know, after a few days of shooting with the horses, they're like, ah, that's okay, you're good, you know. So it was a really, you know, I've never had a more serene and I think just a beautiful experience filming. And we didn't want to leave the farm, we didn't want to leave the forest, and you can really see that pull, you know, and the draw to horses and working with him. And for me, there's a bit of, you know, it's a little heartbreaking that it is, you know, it is disappearing.
I guess that was sort of, yeah, just around that question. That's where I was going to kind of go. You know, all of these, as you just touched upon, you know, many of these, the subjects of your film are sort of leaving the lifestyle, and the film kind of has this open-ended question, not just with the characters themselves, but, you know, what is going to happen to this lifestyle? So I wanted to know, you know, is there a place for a living horse-powered future, or is this kind of more of a eulogy to kind of a progression that's happening? And what is at stake when we lose these kinds of connections that have been so integral to humanity?
Yeah, I think it's the central question for us in making the film was, the film's been described as nostalgic, and I find that interesting because to me, yes, there's these approaches of nostalgia, but, you know, very purposely and intentionally. But for me, the idea, as we were discussing approaches, was how do we there's a sense of presence and the present as well, right? So there's this in this patience, in this connection between the teamster and their horses. There's this extreme presence, and we speak to meditation, and we speak to how do we get to presence in today's world, and what does that mean in the future, right? Does it mean, what does it allow us now? What is this way of working, this connection to sustainable food, sustainable forestry? And I was convinced that, and our characters, I think they're, you know, as much as I could glean from their participation in the project was that they wanted to pass on their knowledge. After 30 and 40 years of experience working with horses, they had proved to themselves that it was not only sustainable in terms of ecologic context, but also economic. To them, they could actually, you know, in relationship to more industrial practices, they proved to themselves and wanted to prove that horses is a sustainable way of working both ecologically and economically, which is very interesting. And I think that's the tension for me, coming from a rural gold mining community as well. There's this tension of community and industry, both in both contexts, and that circles back to our idea of this being a series of projects that look at this relationship and that tension. And to me, you know, the film, it ends in a, okay, right?
Got the landline was up here.
No worries. Yeah, hey, there's real life. Yeah, we wanted to end the film both with that same tension that we found in our subjects, which is a hopeful note with the son Cody, not winning per se, but taking away the joy and this sensorial experience and this sense of he might take it on, he might take the reins, but then also at the same time looking at it, it's really on the razor's edge of whether or not it's going to continue. And when we left our subjects after finishing filming, we didn't have any answers, and that sort of seems to be a theme in the series that we're doing as well, is that there's no clear-cut answers. There's no the future. It really depends on the participants of the community, and it's a very tight-knit community as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think for us it was that ending with that same tension that we discovered.
I see. And so you alluded to it, but you guys are beginning the next installment in this series. So maybe we can end on sort of where you guys are going next and what you're up to.
Yeah, you know, the pandemic has allowed us some time to step back, reflect on the past work in the series and also start developing and really thinking through how we're going to approach the next project. In fact, I'm working on 2 projects right now with Ryan. One is a very personal project that looks at the suicide of my biological father, who was a miner in Northwestern Ontario as well. So that's currently in development, and it's looking at a very, very personal approach to this relationship between community and industry and the isolation in these communities, and from a more mental health perspective. I'm also working out on a new project that looks at potentially the nuclear waste project that's taking place in Ignace as well. So Ignace, Ontario and Northwestern Ontario, it's the second of 2 potential sites for Canada's new nuclear waste repository. So we're very, very early on, and I hesitate to even say that we're going into development on it, but this is something we're looking at. So not only industry that is taking place currently in the present, but what do we do with the waste from that as well? So, and so we're going from mining to agriculture and now to energy as a theme in the next part of the series.
Great. And Ryan?
That's what I'm working on. Both of those.
Okay.
In teaching, and I have 3 small children.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today and speaking to me about this really beautiful and incredible film. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. This is a pleasure to meet you. And again, thank you to the Planet in Focus Film Festival for giving us an online home to share our film. And we're just so excited to be able to share again this this intersection of logging and farming and agricultural life with Canada.
Thank you
So much. Thanks.
Thank you.